Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am quite happy to host this talk by Marcia Trajano, who will be leading our live with the theme Path of Spiritual Evolution. Let's all give Marcia a very warm welcome, but please allow me to introduce her before she starts her presentation. Marcia Trajano is the president and one of the founders of the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living. She is also one of the co-founders of the Christian Spiritist Community of Atlanta and a former board member of the United States Spiritist Federation. She is a Spiritist for more than 25 years and has participated in giving talks and leading study groups in English and Portuguese. With a master's degree in management of technology, Marcia currently works in the field of project management. But please take this opportunity to send your questions during the presentation using the chat window. Marcia has reserved time to address your comments and questions once she concludes her presentation. And now, Marcia Trajano.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. It is such an honor to be here and to be able to speak on this topic. To me, and maybe we can put the yes. Let's go ahead. Just as a framework, because it's a mouthful, right? We're talking today about the paths of spiritual evolution with insights on transformation, suffering, and the evolution of the soul, the evolution of the spirit. And I would just want to say, as Bradley kindly introduced me, my name is Marcia Trajano, and I'm super, super excited to be here and to talk with you today about something that is both deeply personal and profoundly universal, that path of evolution. And not only that, why it requires that suffering, that's the majority of the time we're going to talk about suffering, but also how it leads to transformation. I propose to draw on the insights of Lionel Corbett, who is a well-known Jungian psychologist, and he's also has some some information on the topic in addition to Lionel Corbett with the um, wise and light figures such as Joanna de Angelis, Emmanuel, Leon Denis, and Allan Kardec, of course. So we're going to explore in the next few minutes how suffering in all its forms, and let's think about big, broad suffering, right, can be a powerful tool for our spiritual as well as our psychological growth, our psychological maturity. In Corbett's work, The Soul in Anguish, he has written many other books, including, he just published another one, but this one that I'm going to talk about, it was published in about 10 years ago, 2015, The Soul in Anguish. And to me, it offers this modern voice, this psychological take on how suffering can trigger deep transformation. And what I want us to do here is just to see how his work, he's not spiritist, by the way, but how his work really connects with the teachings that we provide through spiritism. So let's dive in and explore how suffering, while, yes, painful, can be the very, very catalyst for our evolution towards something greater. And let me go to my next slide. And this is just a little bit of what does the book, of course, it's a beautiful photography here that he chose to talk about, to be the cover of his book. But if you're not familiar with Lionel Corbett, he's a Jungian psychologist, as I said, and he spent much of his life exploring that exact connection between psychology and spirituality. And he's particularly interested in this book, especially in how suffering, whether personal or collective, can trigger those deep psychological transformation and spiritual growth. And why did I break? Well, I read the book, and I read the book because I had the opportunity and the honor of hosting him on our podcast. This is a United States Spirit Federation program, the podcast Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, where with him we talked about these themes, right? The themes found in this book, A Soul in Anguish. Indeed, it it has been eye-opening for me, and today I want to share some of the insights on suffering from his book, but how specifically how they connect with the teachings of Joanna de Angelis, Emmanuel, Leon Denis, and Allan Kardec. For those of us who is interested, this is really for professionals, right? So the book presents a variety of approaches to psychotherapy. And the work that is done with those who are suffering. And I might say that all of us are in that group, if you will, right? We all are going through some level of pain and suffering. So the book is for any professional who is working with suffering people from a Jungian and psychoanalytical psychology basis. According to the book summary, and you can Google it on your own time, but the book brings suffering as the key element for the development of our personality, right? And before we dive into the topic proper, it's important to understand because our culture, this is modern day society. This was not always the case, but our culture tends to assume that suffering is invariably negative, right? We do not want to suffer. We want to be happy. We don't want to be sad ever, ever. And in this book, it brings that idea that our culture looks at it as negative, but also as pointless, and it's not necessarily so. Suffering, as we're going to see here, and this is not in any case an apology to suffering, but suffering may indeed lead to very important aspects of our growth, our development, our spiritual enlightenment, if you will. Such as how we can become more empathetic for others, for the pain of others, how we can acquire a certain level of wisdom or even our spiritual development. So the book is here for anyone who's interested, intended to offer as professionals in any profession that is helping those in this predicament of extreme suffering, especially. But it brings several frameworks so that we can view suffering and understand and comfort, and most importantly, understand that it doesn't have to be, because it's probably not, a random or meaningless experience. But let's go ahead and give a little bit view of the topics that Lionel Corbett brings in the book. So we're going to use those topics to talk about our insights into spiritual evolution paths today. The first topic is suffering as a pathway to individuation. Second, the role of suffering in spiritual growth. We're going to just dive a little bit on the concept of the shadow and the unconscious. Yes, he's a psychologist. So, yes, shadow had to come here. But interesting enough, those two next topics are not so well discussed in Spiritism. One is the alchemical process of transformation. Love it. And finally, we close with the idea of the dark night of the soul. So let's take a few minutes to break down some of these ideas found in the book and see how they connect with our spiritual teachings. So we're going to stay here Brad, for just a few seconds and take a note if you have any questions, so that we can talk about further later today. But the first reflection that I have based on the book is the topic of suffering as a pathway to individuation. So in Jungian psychology, of course, individuation, right? It's important for us to understand is the process of becoming your true self, right? In other words, it's a path for integrating our, again, psychological terms, conscious and unconscious parts of our psyche to become whole. In her book, The Integral Human Being, Joanna de Angelis explore this idea to a high degree, right? It's the integrity, the wholeness. But let's think about it, right? If and we all may be familiar with the central concept in Jungian psychology of individuation, it basically refers to this process that you, me, all of us achieve a sense of being whole again, of achieving a sense of plenitude. Another title of Joanna de Angelis' books, right? And she, Joanna, explores this theme in not only those two books that I mentioned, but many of her work within the psychology collection, but I see it really pointedly addressed in the book, The Integral Human Being, which is the second of that 16 book series. Unfortunately, the book is not yet published in English, but it is, oh my goodness, wonderfully written. It is a gem, and I recommend to anyone that is able to get a hold of a copy in Portuguese. But let's take just another second or so to reflect on suffering, right? The topic that is brought in the book is suffering as a pathway to individuation. And suffering can mean different things to different people. To me, I'd like to maybe look into the main aspects, right? The say physical aspect, the physical pain, but also let's look into another big block, which is emotional suffering or emotional pain, and psychological, right? The mental psychological is can usually go very close with the emotional pain, and finally the final bucket for my understanding here is spiritual pain. Where does it come from? Does it have to be coming from within or from an outside event? Yes, and mostly for our way of where we are today in our evolutionary path, it mostly comes from a sense of loss, conflicts, right? Trauma that we go through, but also from within our own sense of limitation. I was doing a discussion just a few days ago on the parable of the talents, right? Where Jesus, through Mark, he brings that idea of the three sons. One son one son, I'm sorry, three servants. One servant is given 5 talents, the other 3 talents, and one is given 1 talent. And it is a wonderful exploration of how we are giving those talents. And talents, no, we're not talking about money. We're really talking about resources that we're given within this reincarnation, because we are capable. It is within our time. It is within our planning for this reincarnation to use those resources. And when we don't, we may suffer what that poor, afraid servant didn't do, right? By bearing his 1 talent. But really, when we are so concerned with the outcomes of our lives, whatever the resources may be, and we then transfer that awareness, even if it's not consciously a conscious awareness, that there is some limitation that we are seeing within ourselves, right? So it's interesting that all of those um, suffering, they force us to face, right? Face ourselves, to face even those parts of ourselves that we'd rather avoid. And I'm specifically thinking about those sense of limitations. I'm failing. I know I'm failing. I could have, I should have, but I'm not, right? So there is a decision, consciously or not, not to really work on those areas that we were somehow committed to do it. But let's go back to Corbett, because according to him, suffering is indeed crucial for the pathway to individuation. And it does that as it breaks down our ego, right? Our masks, our false identity, that illusion that we create to ourselves and to others. And suffering will be this very powerful force to break those and to ultimately lead us to have a more authentic, integrated self. In my mind's eye, everyone, I just see that for me, it's quite iconic, and I like to reference it. This is a Jungian instrument to see that path to individuation as a triangle coming on the second part of our life, usually after our famously unwanted midlife crisis, where we just start to break down what the masks, the personas, the anything that we create to be famous, to be powerful, to be successful in a material reference, a material context. And then by breaking them down, we start the real path to our individuation, to our authentic, integrated self. So just to finalize this topic, Corbett's view, right? Suffering is not just painful, most importantly, suffering is an invitation, yes, invitation for this deeper self discovery and transformation. It's, in my mind, it's a wake up call. Right, it's just Marcia, wake up, and as this annoying alarm clock that is sounding to us and removing from a place of rest, it urges us to get up and to start looking for those areas that we need to look into that and evolve beyond our limited ego-driven identity only. Whew, enough on individuation. Let's talk a little bit about the second topic that you find in his book, which is the role of suffering in spiritual growth. Again, we're talking about almost the same thing, right? Marcia, stop repeating. Well, we're just breaking down. One is the role in the individuation, that sense of integrity. Now we're talking about overarching spiritual growth. And in the book by Corbett, he emphasizes that suffering is essential for that spiritual growth. He views suffering as a this mechanism, this catapult for our spiritual awakening. Yes, we already talked about wake up call, right? But he's talking about this spiritual awakening, and in fact, he brings up many different spiritual traditions that echoes that, not just Spiritism or even Christianity. And those philosophies, those spiritual traditions recognize there's this common attribute of recognizing that suffering really is this element to shake us out of our complacency and pushes us to seek meaning. Really important here, seek meaning beyond our material existence in the material world. But let's think about it. What happens when we're shaking out of our comfort zone, right? What happens when we get those wake up calls, if you will? We're often led to fear, right? There's anxiety that comes from that. But in the positive sense, this is really important to me, is that those wake up calls, there's this sense of discomfort every time we have to grow. And it can be, let's say, in our lives, it can be as cool as going from kindergarten to elementary school, right? This is such an amazing time of our children's lives, or high school, or college, or let's say in the progression of life, you now are, I don't know, let's think about it. Find the love of your life, decide to get married, another area of growth, and often inherent in this is this sense of discomfort. I don't know what to do because it's all new to me. What about going to another job? What about moving to another city? What about, I don't know, having to learn another language? Anything out there that is no longer what we mastered or we were comfortable with before. And it can cause anxiety, fear, and suffering. But getting out of the comfort zone will lead us to a deeper connection with all that is sacred, a connection with the divine, with God. If we think in terms of Jung and Jungian psychology, this is exactly when we start to connect with the self. Now we're talking about self, capital S, right? Which means the totality of our conscious and unconscious minds, which includes, of course, the spiritual, the divine, the sacred aspects of our being. So the idea that Corbett brings here in the role of suffering in spiritual growth mirrors quite nicely with the teachings of Spiritism, where suffering is indeed not a punishment, a form of punishment, but as this amazing opportunity for moral and spiritual growth or spiritual purification. The pain we experience is part of our spiritual evolution, right? And the same pain helps us overcome some past mistakes. And it's very interesting because I've heard before, and I'm sure you may have as well, that many people say, "Oh, you're spiritist, you love suffering." And my first reaction is, "No, no, no, I do not love suffering, but I am aware of the very, very positive aspects that suffering brings to my life." Right? There's some additional ideas that I would like to perhaps bring in here with this concept is that if we start to reflect upon this statement that spiritual awakening through suffering, right? And we can always say, but how specifically? And one way for us to dive a little bit deeper is the idea that indeed we live in a very distracted society. It is a distracted world, our Earth of today. It is a world that has seen, of course, some dramatic changes. If you go back mid 1700s, right, with the Industrial Revolution and the change from an agrarian society to an industrial society has pushed to certain changes. And if you go all the way to the age of education, the age of information, and I have to say, the easy access to information really culminated in the year that is easy for us to think about it is the year 2000, right? 2000 brings a lot of technological advances. The ubiquitous nature of this little devices that we all carry with us wherever we go, right? It also brings the dependency professionally and personally on surfing the internet for information. And of course, this new era that we are welcomed, incited even to share all our thoughts, our lives, our minute by minute evolution via social media outlets. Yes, we are living the 15 minutes of fame that Andy Warhol wisely mentioned. And he said that, it was very interesting, in an interview in 1968. So, of course, predated this boom of information that we're going through, but also this opportunity for the growth of the ability to be an influencer, somebody who is in whatever social media outlet you're using to have that 15 minutes or longer of fame, right? But it's interesting because Andy Warhol really highlighted in his prediction our consumer culture, right? Consumption of data points. And he also highlights this ephemeral nature of celebrity, and also the mass production of culture. Tip for anyone, Joanna de Angelis talks a lot about it in many books, including her most recent in English, the publications of Empty Lives and uh, oh my goodness, what is the other one? I'm thinking in Portuguese, so I'll stop here. We'll get to that point later. But she brings the same topics, and it's awesome when we start to dive into this, and we're not demonizing by any chance social media, but let's think about what does it do to us in this increasingly distracted world, right? Yes, we call it the postmodern man, right? All of us, man as in collective, a genderless, a collective noun. The postmodern man is a distracted man. And so suffering comes back again as this instrument to shake us. And I'm shaking my head here as if thinking that I'm shaking myself. Wake up, right? Shake us out of our distractions and complacency, right? By forcing us to look deeply into ourselves and to look for, to seek and find meaning and purpose beyond our very ephemeral, very material, or very egoic life. And I just say good stuff, right? It is to me. I love this stuff. And it is important for us to think about it when we are somehow shaken out of our complacent, distracted lives. We start to lead to those deeper connections that Corbett and others have mentioned to us. And it's the connections with the transcendent in us. It is a connection with the self. And just as a parenthesis here, as I mentioned before, the self with a capital S, as Jung refers to it, the conscious and unconscious. Joanna de Angelis uses the term, but she uses as a synonym of the spirit. right? So not the persona, for example, Marcia, but when I say the self, Marcia's self with a capital S, we're talking about this immortal spirit that now my corporeal existence in this incarnation inhabits. Incidentally, Corbett draws on when he talks about this topic here on the archetypal themes of death and rebirth in myths, in religious stories. Remember, I mentioned that he compares with many different spiritual traditions, and in those stories, he sees suffering representing the destruction of the old self, right? And if there is a destruction or death of the old self, there is a subsequent birth of a new, a more integrated self. So, very interesting because it just does this really cool mirroring of our dear Joanna de Angelis, the Integral Human Being book. And this is, of course, also similar, those concepts, to the idea of spiritual death, spiritual rebirth or resurrection. And in that idea, we must go through this dark night of the soul to experience a true spiritual renewal, right? We can reference another favorite book of mine, which was written by Leon Denis after death, where Leon Denis, he really emphasizes, and I love when I'm studying that book, right, with group study groups, we always go through this. Why, Leon Denis? Why do you have to title a book? This is so weird. No, it's not. It's just really demystifying death in many different ways. But in that book specifically, Leon Denis emphasizes that death is not an end, right? He brings to the audience, and of course, the book was published, I believe, in 1899 or 89. Sorry for the not knowing, within a decade, but more than a century ago. And in that book, he brings to his audiences the idea that death is not an end, but a transition to another phase of existence, right? And it's where we go from a material dimension to the spiritual realm, where our soul, our spirit continues its beautiful, immortal journey. As such, of course, we face the idea of reincarnation and how it is key to understand the path of individual, I'm sorry, to of spiritual evolution, because reincarnation offers opportunities for our moral growth. We reincarnate to learn from past mistakes, and yes, those mistakes, if there's a suffering component to those learnings, we learn faster, right? We could go into a whole hour talking about it. We're not, but it's very interesting. We reincarnate, we learn whatever the methodology for us to learn in this framework that our spiritual lives requires, right? But we're learning also, we reincarnate also beyond learning to grow. And we grow by attaining what we could call a purification of our soul, an enlightenment, I prefer that word, of our souls, right? So the pain, suffering, even challenges that we encounter in our lives are seen as vital to this evolutionary process. And Spiritism provides us this beautiful framework for understanding and really embracing our eternal nature, right? Um, the shadow in the unconscious, another very powerful concept in Corbett's work, is the shadow. Shadow is that unconscious, repressed parts of our psyche that we kind of tend to deny on one hand, or um, I just read another book, Joanna's book, that we go into those projections, right? We either deny or it comes to us because we project onto others. Anyways, we're not going to talk about that book. We're going to talk about this theme here. Um, the shadow, I like to see this picture of it is a metaphor for what we do, meaning when we repress some parts of ourselves in the shadow. It's like sweeping under the rug, right? And we know it's dirty, right? But we don't want to see it, and we don't want anybody to see it. We sweep under the rug. Suffering often forces us to face our shadow, to look under the rug, potentially to clean under the rug, right? So the shadow work, as we call it, is when we confront the parts of ourselves that we're not so proud of, or we may even be ashamed of, even if it is mostly unconscious shame or not being proud of. That concept of shadow in psychology, it's good to just for a reference, was actually first introduced by Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychologist, right? That we're referencing here, or um, Lionel Corbett reference. He's a Jungian psychoanalyst, and it was first introduced to us in 1910, and he brings that idea of the shadow as part of his theory of unconscious mind. Again, we're not going to talk about it, but it's good for us to have a sense of historic development of those concepts. Joanna de Angelis, again, from the same idea, brings to us the psychology collection. So her books really focusing on how psychology and spirituality are mirrored. But interesting for us to know, its first book on this 16-book collection was Jesus in Our Days, right, in the Portuguese version, and was first introduced to us, I believe, in 1974. So it predated by several decades to, of course, Lionel Corbett's publication 10 years ago of The Soul in Anguish. But Joanna provides us additional insight on the topic. So it's beautiful when we start reading a book that was meant for other people in the same area of psychology, and we read it, right? And we start to see, oh, thank you, Joanna de Angelis, for already have given to us some of those same insights. Anyways, she teaches on the subject that the shadow represents the less evolved aspects of the spirit. And you can say, no, duh, Marcia, it's implicit in what you're saying here, but it's important for us to understand that in a very specific spiritual explanation of a psychological term, she brings to the forefront the idea of a spirit that is evolving, a spirit that is immortal, right? And she says to us that indeed confronting and transforming our shadow is key to our spiritual maturity. And of course, every time we avoid, and we're really good at it, right? We avoid to confront the things we don't want to confront. It will create, according to Joanna, some emotional upheavals, some turmoils, and will lead potentially to a spiritual stagnation in the area that you're avoiding. So, in so many words, when suffering brings up uncomfortable truths, it's actually, I know I'm going to sound like Pollyanna, the forever optimist, but it is an actual opportunity for integration. So whenever we are brave, courageous enough to embrace and transform our shadow, we then start to really experience deep spiritual growth. Hope it makes sense to you. The fourth of the final topics that the book brings to us is the alchemical process of transformation. And I say, okay, let's talk about alchemy, yeah? And I know it sounds a bit mystical and strange, right? But alchemy at its core is about transformation. It's about purifying base metals into gold. And in a symbolic sense, it really represents that inner transformation we go through on our spiritual journey. Corbett uses that metaphor of alchemy to describe how suffering specifically refines the psyche, and he says, just like fire in alchemy, right? And outside of alchemy as well. So just as fire purifies metals, suffering burns away delusions, those false identities that we take on, right? In some cases, we can even talk about the imposter syndrome that we take, whatever, right? Any type of limiting belief that prevents us from not being who we are, right? They prevent us from becoming our true selves. What emerges from this process, this alchemical process, is that individuated being, the authentic integrated person. So close circle with the topics. It's good for us to always remember that Spiritism similarly teaches to the notion that suffering is a form of purification, right? Spiritual purification, because it helps us evolve toward that moral perfection through our many lives, through our many incarnations. Let's find lines here with the dark night of the soul, because Corbett in his book talks about the dark night of the soul. And for all of us to just we get to the same notion of what he's talking about, he is referencing a period of profound inner turmoil where we confront our deepest fears, our doubts or questions, our unresolved conflicts. And it is during these dark times that we can experience the most significant breakthroughs that we need to go through. If we flip now to Spiritism, right, and Spiritist literature, we find very similar themes for example, Emmanuel, where he doesn't use the phrase "the dark night of the soul," I don't believe, but he often speaks about those spiritual crises that lead to inner renewal, right? Those are times of deep suffering, perhaps, and those exactly the time that they provide opportunities for growth, for healing, and a closer alignment with the divine will. Joanna de Angelis, like Emmanuel, also touches on those moments of spiritual anguish, and she calls them opportunities for self-discovery and inner healing. Joanna, as a teacher, spiritual teacher, she tells us that we shouldn't shy away from this crisis, but embrace them as part of our evolutionary path. And she often says, right, suffering is not a punishment, it is a tool for our growth and our purification. So I'm coming close to my end today, and I just wanted to bring to you some key takeaways, and I'll read, it's in the screen, but there are three, right? And we're just getting close to a wrap up here. Some of key takeaways from our reflections include spiritual renewal. In bold is an ongoing process of inner transformation that often involves suffering. Okay, so emphasis, renewal, It is ongoing process. It is a process of inner transformation that is inherently included, often, not always, but often includes suffering. So the next point from our takeaway is, of course, about suffering. And we've said many times with many authors, suffering is not punishment. But it is a tool for our own growth. And as such, it really helps us develop virtuous qualities such as patience, humility, and empathy, among others. And the last and final point that we want to bring here is the path of spiritual evolution, right? That path for spiritual evolution really is one that requires embracing selflessness and living in alignment with higher values like love, charity, and wisdom. I'd love to talk more about it. If we have some questions, we may be going into those because it's really important for us to understand that an enlightened spirit is one that embraces this new qualities, new abilities to selfless love, for example. As we navigate our own spiritual journey, we can think about how do we respond to suffering, right? Do you avoid it? Do I avoid it? Probably yes. But, anyways, do we avoid it? Do we, on the contrary, embrace it as an opportunity for growth? And I'd like to maybe close this takeaways with some words from Leon Denis that says the soul evolves through its trials, and it is through love and patience that we reach the highest spiritual heights. So interesting to that we can talk, quote, right, in reference Emmanuel, Joanna de Angelis, Allan Kardec about suffering and spiritual transformation, and including those concepts like the dark night of the soul, which we can talk more about if we have time, if you're interested. But in any case, I want to wrap up with some practical steps for spiritual renewal, and they are very close to us, right? Meditation and reflection. How can we cultivate using meditation, reflection, prayer, that moment where we create an opportunity to go into our inner space, go inside of us and cultivate inner peace and clarity. Really important for this postmodern man that I referenced earlier. Another practical step for our spiritual renewal is an amazing one that if you were to get all of the five books by Allan Kardec and put one word, is this word, which is love through charity. Charity, right? Service to others. It is truly essential for our spiritual growth, right? So we talk about going inside with our meditation or prayers or reflections, but then it's also a call to get out of our inside, to look to the others, to wake up for the reality and give of ourselves to those who are now suffering, right? And the last and final step for our spiritual growth and renewal is simply forgiveness and compassion, right? Those practices help us evolve spiritually, and they help us by releasing, resentment, anger, all those stuff that we love to hold on. Let us take the opportunity to start forgiving, start being more compassionate to ourselves and to others. So when we integrate these into our daily lives, we now can embark on a journey of continual spiritual renewal. And I just want to say thank you so much for being part of this discussion today. Let's just take a moment to reflect on our personal journeys, right? Embrace the opportunities for growth that all of us have. And I would say those opportunities come to us daily, if not hour by hour, right? And when we embrace those opportunities for growth, we continue to grow. And I just wanted to say thank you. And with a very, very silly thought, I have a photo of steps leading to an open door with light that sheds through. So let's remember, suffering is not the end of the road. As Leon Denis mentioned to us, it is often the doorway to transformation. Through suffering, we refine, we elevate who we are as a spirit. And when we embrace it, we learn from it, we grow through it. Thank you so much. Brad, back to you.
Wonderful insights and reflections you provided us today. Everyone, please stay with us for the Q&A session, which will start shortly after just a few announcements. There is a free virtual course for beginners from the United States Spiritist Federation, who is thrilled to invite individuals eager to explore the realm of spirit communications according to Spiritism. Check out the new course at the Spiritist at learn.spiritist.us or scan the QR code on the flyer. And be certain to check out the continuing podcast-like series, Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. There is a new episode which appears every Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. It is available on YouTube and Spotify. Are you curious about what lies beyond the veil of death? Join us on a profound journey of exploration as we delve into the mysteries of the afterlife with a new book, Transcendence, Life and the Hereafter by Joanna Corngold. It is available at spiritistbooks.us store. There's also a wonderful Spiritist app, Be My Hope, available from the App Store and Google Play. This app offers uplifting content in a collection of videos, daily messages, and audio materials. Download it today and check it out. There's also a now available 7 free professionally recorded Spiritist audiobooks, sponsored and produced by the Spiritist Society of the Carolinas. At your own pace, you can listen to Allan Kardec's foundational works on YouTube at Spiritist Society Carolinas. And you will note on the screen, there's a QR code. If you want to help the United States Spiritist Federation produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the QR code on screen for your donation. Now, let's start addressing the comments or questions from the audience. There's still time to send yours. And the first one is from the United States Spiritist Federation. Does the degree of our moral or spiritual failures determine the degree of our suffering?
That's a very good question, and I appreciate that. And this is my personal opinion, everyone. It should not be a correlation, meaning that if you look at somebody who's suffering tremendously and you say, oh, poor, pitiful Marcia, look at her. There's nothing that goes right in her life. She's suffering. Therefore, she is actually not very spiritually or morally evolved, right? So it doesn't. Why do I say that? Well, let's think about from a definition of the world of trials and expiations, right? Expiations or atonement really means that sense of purification, right? Where our soul, I love the expiation, right? Pia means pure, ex, which is outside. So it's the idea of coming from inside out to become pure again. As a spirits, we all know we are created unaware, in simple, right? Meaning very, very pure of innocent, if you will, in our simplicity and in our growth toward creating the path of evolution through experience, through knowledge, through decisions, through the use of our free will. We often lead to certain areas of, unfortunately, the most central theme today was suffering, right? But we may cause pain with our unaware state, and I may cause pain to myself, I may cause pain to you, to others, to the planet, and that creates a mechanism for expiating that may include, indeed, through the law of cause and effect, right? Action and reaction. We get to a point that we need to learn, and suffering occurs. I think it's important for us to understand there are some amazing individuals that we can consider highly evolved spirits, and I'm going to be uh, look into individuals that I just admire, right? A Mother Teresa or Nelson Mandela, but also closer to us in Spiritism, a Francisco Xavier or Divaldo Franco. They, despite of their amazing work and clear enlightenment, it did not mean they were exempt of suffering, right? They went through very specific suffering that they needed to go through in their process of expiating. So, to answer your question, I don't believe that we can quantify the degree of our moral or spiritual failures as exemplified by the degree of our suffering in our existence today. Do you agree with that, Bradley?
Thank
Do
you
you?
very much, Marcia.
Yeah.
Very much. Okay, and from the TVCEI International
Mhm.
Spiritist Council, can we measure our moral evolution in the earthly life or only in the spiritual?
Oh, that's another one that it's awesome question. So thank you, whoever created the question. How can we measure our more evolution, right? Is it us? Is it our conscious? And I believe it is in the process of awakening and consciousness, right? When we talk about, for example, the expansion of our consciousness, that is how we can evolve morally on earth. But who measures? It's ourselves, it's our conscience. It's written in the Spirit's book, that specific question on where do we find, right, that measure. And it's all written in within us. But going back to the topic that Lionel Corbett in his book brilliantly put to us, and I love to reference back to it, badly, because he, as I said before, he's not a spiritist, right? He's not even Christian, by the way, and yet he brings some really great topics that mirrors quite nicely with spiritism. And in this topic, we discuss the path for individuation, but also the path of working with our shadow, which is the mechanism by which we repress our, say, it's not it, but I'm going to call it with my air quotes, our wrongdoings, the things that we want to repress. So, with that mechanism of repressing who we are, we really are unable to have a full picture of our own moral evolution, right? Interesting enough, in those psychological topics here that we brought up, and we brought up individuation, we brought up shadow work, right? Shadow work. But implicit in those two is the idea that we do have a personal unconscious, a conscious and unconscious, right? And that, of course, was brought by the father of psychology, Sigmund Freud. And later on, then Jung um, brought the idea of uh, the collective unconscious. So beyond the unconscious that we are not aware in this life, so it's very much the material life. We are brought the idea of the collective unconscious that we all immersed. So we really, as a race, we are unaware still of where we are in our development, in our spiritual evolution. The other aspect that is important for all of us, because we are not a most likely in our first incarnation, right? We have many different corporeal existence through the concept of life after material death, physical death. In that, the uh, we are always evolving, right? Based on our very personally chosen path. So, in so many words, we could say, Bradley, that I could come visit you in many different ways, right? I could take a car, take the train, take my bicycle. I can run. I can take a plane, and that will be a different time frame by uh, just by the choosing different ways of transportation for how fast I get to you. And it's the same thing. It is our choice to choose the means and the speed acceleration by which we want to evolve. Does this make sense?
Oh, makes sense. Thank you very
Uh,
much for that.
you're very welcome.
And again, from TVCEI, International Spiritist Council, is there a
Hmm.
difference between pain and suffering according to Spiritism?
This is a very good question. So thank you, whoever brought that to us, because um, often we put them together, right? Pain and suffering. But according to Spiritism, they're really distinct thoughts, but of course closely related. So the difference is maybe better thought as we think and we look into our human experience, right? Our spiritual growth and our moral evolution. Why? Because pain, we can usually pinpoint pain to a specific physical or emotional response to an external factor, right? So, for example, it can be, I don't know, a biological, because we're of course biological beings, or but we're also psychological beings. So it could be a biological reaction, or it can be a psychological reaction to something that is causing us a sense of discomfort or distress. It can be an injury, right? A result of an injury. I decided, folks, that I want to visit Brad by biking. Right? We're saying we're gonna do this. I'm gonna start biking today, and I decide I'm gonna visit my friend Bradley. And boom, first mile. I unfortunately I'm out of shape. I fall. I cut myself. I also I am taken to. It was a serious cut. I'm taken to the hospital. I get worse because I catch a some bacteria, and I'm just exaggerating here. And there's the pain resulting from those choices, right? Or the emotional pain of I promised I would visit you, and I promised that we're going to do this by bike, and look what I've done. But suffering, on the other hand, is really a concept to encompasses now not how do I get inflicted and I react, but how those reactions causes me a sense of suffering due to loss, due to a challenge or hardship, etc. So, from that perspective, now we're talking here about from a spiritist perspective. Suffering is much more tied to our spiritual or moral attributes, right, of our own journey. So, from that perspective, suffering really encapsulates, for example, that decision from a, let's say, a prior incarnation to come through this new incarnation with a commitment to X. And if I deviate from X and become Y, or as we mentioned earlier, right, I become so distracted that I now all I want to do is watch TV, surf the web, embark in social media comments. I actually become paralyzed in my stagnant in my growth, and I may suffer even though I don't know. But it starts to surface that suffering because we now are understanding that we're deviating from what we should be done, right? We should have been doing. And this is how the parable of the talents is comes really very, very fresh to me, right? And as a question from the question, I would say, what are we doing? What are we doing with the talents that we have received? What are we doing with the challenges that life has brought to us? Not just talking about pain or suffering, but the resources that are given to us, the power, charisma, the ability to speak, to influence, the political clout, or financial resources. What are we doing with that? Um, are we embarking in a very egoic way to use those talents, those resources, or are we really using that to better myself and the collective, right?
Very helpful explanation. Thank you. From the United States Spiritist Federation,
Uh-huh.
is our earthly path, the good and the suffering, predetermined, or can we make changes to it?
Yeah, so our so I referenced several times, right? The idea of a planning for your reincarnation for those that have read about it. It's a really interesting topic of mine that planning. There's so many books. Andre Luis. With the reincarnation Sigismund that in his book in one of his books in his series gives us the sense, right? So this the spirit is wanting to reincarnate, so he himself, right, as a spirit decides to come and reincarnate in this family. And I'm not going to spoil for you if you haven't read, but it's really a complicated situation, a quite a drama worthy of a telenovela, right? But he wants to. He knows that he has grown. He has studied while in his spiritual dimension, right? As a spirit, and he was ready to come back and exercise the I talked earlier about the we are in the plane of trials and expiation. This will be more of a trial, right? Can I prove that I have learned, and how can I do this in a context that is not so easy? And so from that perspective, we say that there is a desired outcome of all of us, but unlike, and this is important here, everyone, unlike many Eastern religions that also talk about karma as the word for what we call in Spiritism action and reaction, or the law of cause and effect, right? In most Eastern traditions, not all, there is implicit fatalistic or predetermined karma to your past. So, for example, if I don't know. I'm gonna poke on you again, Bradley. If I was really not so nice to Bradley, and I was not so nice at all, and I wanted something he had, so I stole from him. Well, in this life, then Bradley steals from me, and it's, yeah, it's a direct correlation. Almost, I can see the Isaac Newton smiling at us. Yes, it's the contrary force, right? The same force with the opposite direction, tit for tat, or we can even think about the Mosaic laws, right? Eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. It's not. According to Spiritism, we can look at the debts that we carry, our karma, if you will, but we can determine how much, for how long, and how to go about repairing and achieving a sense of no longer have a bond of debt between two people, or a person and many people, but to be able to release those bonds, because you're able to learn and to go through a path of reparation, of forgiveness, etc.
Wow.
So,
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. And from the United States Spiritist Federation, is introspection enough for awareness in our spiritual journey?
yeah, I would like to say it should be, right? It should be, but remember, I don't know if you remember, but what I talked a little bit about was that there's three takeaways. Number one is introspection. It is that spiritual journey, right? You go in to uncover who you are. That inner discovery, our inner transformation from that courageous look at who we are truly. But then there's a second point, is now go outside, right? Don't stay into that. The Spirit's book also references this question, Bradley, when we, or Kardec, asked about the notion of, say, in my words, those monks and nuns, and oh, by the way, when I was a child, that's all I wanted to be, was go back to the Middle Ages and be a nun in a convent, because I thought that life of worship was beautiful, beautifully sanctified in my mind. And we are told by the spirits, right, that no, 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 it would be too easy, Bradley, right? It would be too easily. You move yourself into, I don't know, to somewhere in the Tibet, and you go through your introspection, 12 hours of meditation, and you're good. But we need to confront, right? And we need to confront those that act as the perfect person for us to project our shadow and confront this. And how do I deal with this person that I hate? And all I'm doing is projecting the parts of myself that I hate, which I wouldn't otherwise. Right. The other thing is, in addition to the ability to look at the shadow work through the contact with and conflicts that derive from contact with other people, there's a third component, which is service. The charity is practicing that love that most of us are far away from doing it. If I think about the work, for example, that Divaldo Pereira Franco is doing with his organization, non-profit organization of Mansão do Caminho, that's the type of thing, right? That we can see this beautiful life dedicated, committed to selfless love, not only to a few, to himself and to a few, but selfless love to a very large extent to so many individuals. He is an agent of change, and we should all be uh, able to really know more about what he has done, right? But be inspired by anyone who, at an early age, I think he was not yet 20 when he started his work of charity and serving others. So that's what I would say. It would be we need to also practice selfless love.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Marcia. And many thanks to everyone who's watched today's Talk Live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritus Talk series. Next Saturday, February 1st, we will have Marcia Barros speaking on the Spiritus Center of the 21st century. Marcia, before we close the live, would you please offer a prayer?
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity, everyone, for us to perhaps, if you feel comfortable, to close our eyes and unite ourselves in this mental picture of all of us holding hands, but also in a circle receiving all the beautiful energy that comes from above, from our Creator, God, our Father. And with this light that shines through all of us, may we again, united in spirit, united in purpose, be more aware whenever we're suffering, whenever we're going through pain, we all be better understanding and be able to embrace those moments so that we can indeed grow in our spiritual journey. So be it.